The subjunctive in Spanish is a grammatical mood that uses verbs to express an attitude toward an action, like things that are wanted, emotional, impersonally expressed, recommended, doubted, and hoped. Linguistically, it doesn't tell us when something happens, but how the speaker feels about it. In these final Spanish lessons, I will explain how all variations of the subjunctive work in Spanish, but the method will be different, starting with the present subjunctive. Before learning its formation, it's important to grasp what the subjunctive even is. The subjunctive mood is in a world of reality as an idea, meaning that events may or may not happen in general, thereby creating uncertainty and possibility. The psychology of the mood can appear in sentences where two people's realities are in tension. So, it's the grammar of influence that shows the subject's attempt to change reality, using will, emotion, influence, recommendation, doubt, hope, or any other possibility that gives the idea of uncertainty. There's a very big reason why I listed these traits, because across many Spanish courses, you will see the acronym WEIRDO that a lot of people would recommend. While such concepts can be good, they condense the most common uses of the mood, but they don't actually explain what the subjunctive is. This is why I've chosen this approach of teaching the subjunctive first, because it's a mood that represents something more subtle. Conceptually, it's the mood of possibility and uncertainty, so it expresses something that may or may not be real in general. We can collect all of these ideas, put them in many sentences, and see them more reasonably. All of these phrases have the idea of uncertainty, because we don't know if they will happen, and that's why it's called the subjunctive. By saying or simply thinking about these sentences, they express a possibility that may or may not happen. The fact that a possibility can happen is what activates the subjunctive, regardless of what it is. If I express any of these sentences, it doesn't mean that these things will happen, so it creates a possibility. The point is that all of these expressions, whether it's will, emotion, doubt, or hope, are all uncertain, thereby opening a possibility. This is the true definition of the subjunctive, not just in Spanish, but in any language. Another technique that can be used to understand the subjunctive is the word que with a main clause and a dependent clause. Spanish uses the subjunctive mainly after que because it's activated when one clause depends on another's mental stance, one person's belief, desire, or emotion, and another person's potential action. This concept will make more sense later in the video. Now, after this description, we can finally see the present subjunctive in Spanish. To conjugate verbs in this mood, we follow a pattern of a main clause plus que plus the subjunctive, but sometimes the mood appears in different phrases, which I will show later. For now, we can understand how to conjugate verbs, following two patterns depending on the verb type. Ar, ir. For regular ar verbs, take an infinitive, drop the ending, and add the following endings. Es, hemos, eis, en. For regular and ir verbs, the endings are switched. A, as, amos, ais, an. In this case, a switch of vowels happens in the verbs. In the indicative, the endings appear to be normal, but in the subjunctive, they're switched. So, this is how we conjugate verbs in the present subjunctive, and these endings apply to any verb in the language. Let's see the verb hablar, to speak. To conjugate it in the present subjunctive, take the infinitive, drop the ending, and add the subjunctive endings that match every subject. Once again, make sure that the action is in the stance of uncertainty. Hable, hables, hable, hablemos, habléis, hablen. Very commonly, the conjugation in yo and él, ella will be borrowed in any verb, so context and subject meaning tell the difference. Now, let's see a different verb, like comer, to eat. To conjugate this verb, take the infinitive, drop the ending, and add the endings that match the subjects. Once again, the endings are switched. Coma, comas, coma, comamos, comáis, coman. Because subjunctive endings are identical, the verb vivir, to live, follows the same endings. Viva, vivas, viva, vivamos, viváis, vivan. So, this is how we conjugate regular verbs in the mood, but we also have to see irregular verbs. Because Spanish has so many, it's best to categorize each type based on the irregularity, rather than memorize each one. Although Spanish has a lot of verbs, subjunctive endings are always the same, so irregularities will often come from stems, irregular yo forms, or completely unusual verbs. The first type is the stem change e to ye in a verb like pensar, to think. Pensar changes the stem in all pronouns except nosotros and vosotros, also known as a boot verb. Piense, pienses, piense, pensemos, penséis, piensen. Another type is the stem change o to ue in a verb like poder, can or be able to, following the same pattern. Pueda, puedas, pueda, podamos, podáis, puedan. Another type is the stem change e to e in a verb like pedir, to ask for, but this type changes the stem in every pronoun. Pida, pidas, pida, pidamos, pidáis, pidan. Now, we can take a look at irregular verbs that borrow the present indicative yo form. What this means is that a verb like tener, to have, is irregular in yo in the present. Tengo. When this verb is subjunctive, it borrows the stem teng and adds the subjunctive endings. Tenga, tengas, tenga, tengamos, tengáis, tengan. This pattern is also true for other verbs like hacer, to do or make, decir, to say or tell, venir, to come, conducir, to drive, and traducir, to translate. Now, we can see other verbs that are irregular orthographically. In other words, some verbs that end in car, gar, and sar will receive a letter or change one to preserve the original sound as it is in the infinitive. A verb like buscar, to search, will change s to k. Busque, busques, busque, busquemos, busquéis, busquen. The verb pagar, to pay, follows the same system, receiving u to maintain the original sound. Pague, pagues, pague, paguemos, paguéis, paguen. The verb empezar, to start, changes zeta to se, and it's also stem changing. Empiece, empieces, empiece, empecemos, empecéis, empiecen. Finally, we can see verbs that are totally irregular, with no pattern to follow. Such verbs should simply be memorized, and they include dar, to give, ir, to go, haber, an auxiliary verb, which will be useful in the present perfect subjunctive. Saber, to know, ser, to be, and estar, to be. The use of ser and estar is the same in the indicative as it is in the subjunctive. Even the conjugations of estar have accents to distinguish the words from other words that may borrow the form in the language. So, this is the pattern of irregular verbs in the Spanish subjunctive, and now we can see some examples with the idea of uncertainty. Here, we can follow each subjunctive idea on its own, like desire and influence. Quiero que vengas.
Sugiero que estudies.
Another trigger is emotion. Me alegra que estés aquí. Temo que sea tarde. A different trigger is doubt and denial. Dudo que funcione. No creo que puedan venir. Considering these ideas, the triggers all lead to possibility and uncertainty. Es posible que llueva. Puede que tengan razón. Even so, impersonal expressions also trigger the mood. Es importante que estudies. Es necesario que salgamos temprano. Taking in what we just saw and what I mentioned at the beginning of the video, all of these ideas make the acronym WEIRDO, using the following concepts. While the acronym is useful, the true meaning of the mood is the fact that every concept triggers uncertainty and possibility, which leads to the subjunctive. The final letter, O, stands for ojalá, meaning hopefully, I hope, or if only in Spanish. This word also activates the mood because it expresses hope and emotion, often without que, like saying, ojalá llueva, ojalá puedas venir. As a fun fact, the word comes from Arabic, meaning may God will it, which further explains why it's used in the mood. The last thing to note is that the subjunctive can also appear in time expressions that lead to future uncertainty. Spanish uses the subjunctive after time words when the action has not happened yet, like cuando, hasta que, antes de que, and cuánto. The mood is triggered with these words because they often start dependent clauses, which is what I said at the beginning of the video. A sentence like te llamaré cuando llegue is subjunctive because the arrival has not happened yet, so it's uncertain if I will arrive. In comparison to the indicative, the mood shows reality and habitual past fact, so this distinction is very important. Overall, this is how the present subjunctive fully works in Spanish. The main rule to know is the difference between something presented as a fact or uncertainty, so in the final Spanish videos, we'll see how all subjunctives are formed in the language.